What's up, y'all, and welcome to Durag Thoughts. My name is Trevor Wendt. I'm a visual artist raised in Virginia Beach, Virginia. I make art to challenge perspectives and give hope to the marginalized and oppressed. And in this space, Durag Thoughts is where we talk about topics and conversations that challenge perspectives and give hope to the marginalized and oppressed. And this season 2, we've been walking through and just rocking out conversations surrounding my project, City of God. And today we're going to be talking about the track Calvin Phillips Drive, which if you haven't seen it, you should probably pause this video and go watch that on my page right now. And today we're going to be talking about just the idea of home and spaces and what that means and just having some conversations of whatever naturally flows from that. My conversation partner for today is a portrait, brand, and wedding photographer based out of Tennessee, a person who is also a mutual Enneagram number 4 with a 3 wing, same as me, is a lover of light and a person that I've been blessed to have a part of this project. She's responsible for most of the BTS photos that you've seen coming out from this project weekly on my Instagram. And so, yeah, I'm excited to introduce y'all to my friend, Anna Hedges.
Thanks, Trevor. It's so wonderful to be here. And yeah, it's always a joy to speak with you. And you're honestly an inspiration and such a source of creativity for me too, and I really appreciate being here for sure.
I appreciate you. I'm excited to talk to you about some of this stuff today. So to give people a little bit of background to the narrative of just kind of the background story surrounding this piece. So I'd moved to Johnson City, Tennessee in 2016, which is just like half an hour from Bristol where I was at, and I'd moved there to start seminary. If y'all paid attention to the beginning of this project, I had thought I was going to seminary out in Vancouver, British Columbia. And the school I decided to go to, Emmanuel Christian Seminary, was a school that I had applied to. I had applied to just 3 schools for grad school when I was leaving undergrad. And it just wasn't one of those places that, like, it wasn't the top tier for me. I knew what I wanted. I wanted to go elsewhere, and I wanted to be in a big city and be in a more diverse city and just have some of those influences going on, and living out of the country could be fun. And so none of that happened. If you paid attention to some of the stuff surrounding Fear Lane, you've got some of the context around that for those who've watched that. And so I moved to seminary, and it was really just kind of this transition season of me asking questions of like, what's this going to look like? Moved on to the on-campus housing, which is what you see in the video. And I was just wondering, okay, so what's this season going to look like? And for me, as I look back into that time and some of the stuff surrounding it, I think about home. I think about what home means for me. Home has been a massive theme throughout this project, but like the space of home and what I think about designing my spaces and like why that's significant to me, how that's important to me. I've talked about in other episodes about how you can tell that spaces matter to me by just where I'm sitting, what surrounds me and how that's designed and laid out, because I'm affected by my spaces a lot. I'm affected if they're messy. I'm affected if they're clean and well designed. I'm affected if there's art around me or if there's not. And so for me, there's been a lot of that. And that was one of those times where I'm like, I don't know what this space is going to bring for me. Not just the seminary transition space, but like the actual place I was living in, and, being able to try to make that space feel like home and provide whatever like energy or motivation or whatever that would give me. But for you, Anna, like, what does home as like a space mean to you? I see from time to time that window. You'll post photos on your IG stories of this like sunset coming through these windows in your room. And it seems like home is a really significant place for you, and light and being able to like be in a space where you can consistently see good light and have good light coming in seem like they're really, really important to you.
Yeah, they're extremely important to me. I think first of all, like the first word that comes to mind when I think of home is just belonging. and somewhere where I belong, and the things around me. It's like our environment influences behavior. So I try to, like, I mean, what you said really resonates, because it just, like, the things around me influence me so much, and they just like, yeah. So I try to keep the things that bring joy to me, that are inspiring to me, that give me life. I try to keep those things around. And if they don't, and really just paying attention to what does and what doesn't, and like what shifts my energy and like things like that. And so I try to keep, I try to keep that which does bring light to me, in my personal space, especially. But yeah, so I have this, I live in a studio loft apartment on a third floor downtown, and our downtown's really small. So this building is actually higher than most other buildings downtown. And when I knew it was like a building that I wanted to live in, and it was just like really sweet and special. But I had, when I moved here, I guess it was probably like a year and a half, maybe almost 2 years ago, a year and a half ago. And I had gone through a divorce. I had lived with some of my friends, and they had created a really sweet space for me. Like, they had an attic upstairs at their house, and that was really great. But this is actually like the first time that I've ever lived, on my own, like by myself. I grew up in a big family, and then I was married for 13 years. And so this was the first time I had ever had my own space. And when I moved in here, there's only like one window in this studio, but it's pretty big, and it's west facing. So there's a sunset. And because the building's higher than all the other buildings, it's the rooftops of all the buildings downtown, and then it's west facing. So it's just like the sunsets every single day, just like take my breath away. Yeah. It sounds kind of cliche, but it's just so, it's honestly, that window is one of the sweetest gifts I've ever been given.
Yeah. I mean, and one of the things that I'll never forget about that area of Tennessee is that the sunsets are insane. Like, there's, and I don't know if it's just like, I don't know how the actual science of sunsets work and stuff, but sunsets just feel different out there. And you know, I've had plenty of critique throughout this whole record about some of my experiences in that area, but sunsets are not something that was a negative experience for me in that area. Like, whether it was like driving home through, you know, some of those highways where you're just surrounded by trees, and then like the sky just goes wild, or whether you've hiked up a mountain and you know, peeped a sunset at a certain point of time, like, to be able to like consistently see the sun setting, and to be high enough that a building doesn't get in front of blocking it. Like, at my family's house right now, like where I've been this year, the sun sets to the window behind me, but it's like there's a church that is like, I don't know, let's say like 100 yards or like 300 yards or something like that. Let's say like 200 yards. Let's cut in the middle. That's away from the house. Like, they're 2 houses over, and it just blocks the sun. Like, once the sun starts getting low enough, it just blocks the sun. So even at times where I'm like, I'm gonna go shoot golden hour at the house, and you know, I'm shooting something in the backyard or something, I have to really plan for like 2 hours prior to sunset, because I know that like, if I don't give myself enough time, you're going to be halfway through golden hour and the sun's going to get blocked by this church, and it pisses me off. It just pisses me off.
It's honestly the worst when that happens.
Yeah, and it's just like that. It's such a challenge. But yeah, that's got to be really special, because I think about like the one time, well, I guess I've been to Cali twice. Once on my trip, you know, that kind of was the before of City of God, like what leads into Fear Lane. That was my trip across the country, the Westward Summer. And we drove through California, like all up through California, went to Southern California, and then up into like Yosemite and stuff like that. And then I was in California last May, which was a really special time for me. Which is one of the reasons why I want to move to LA. But it was
You're going to.
Yeah, it's like everyone give me a year, like give me 6 months, give me like something, like sometime like this time next year, I pray to God I am living in Los Angeles, California. But I'm also very open to what the Lord has for me. But yeah, so seeing the sun like set on the water is such a freaking like visceral experience. It's just it's so different. It's so different. You know, I mean, it's like you seldomly see the sun rise on the water because you have to be up so early for it to happen. And so it's like you have to make this intentional effort. Like, I'm going to Virginia Beach, or I'm gonna like, and I grew up there. And it's like, I'm going to the beach and I'm gonna see this sunrise. Like, even at times when I lived like at the ocean front, like look out the window and the ocean is right there. Like, I still wasn't seeing the sunrise all the time. And it would take like an intentional effort to go out there and experience it. But to be like, oh yeah, we're just driving, you know, to get on the PCH, you know, Pacific Coast Highway, for people who don't know what that is. And I'm just seeing the sun just like drop over this water constantly. And that, yeah, it's special. It's really dope. So to have a house where you're constantly seeing that and like setting over a city, but also like kind of the natural elements that surround Johnson City, I imagine that's something really, really dope.
I mean, it honestly is. I never get over it. I'm like, I think to myself all the time, like, why does this never get old? And they're just always different. And it's funny because I'll, even if I have a light on or something, I'll like, if I like glance out of my periph and I'm like, oh, the sun's setting. And then I just like rush around my apartment and turn all the lights off and take a picture. I mean, it's just like, it's like my body just like forces me to do it or something. Yeah. It never gets old because it's always different. It's the same, but it's different. And that's just wild to me.
Yeah. So for you, when it comes to like home and just like we talked about a little bit before, just kind of getting energy and like, I know for me specifically, if my house is messy, I will not be as productive. I just won't.
Sure.
Like, it's so much more difficult. And then if my house is like clean and it's styled like the way that I want it, or even if I have like art up on the walls and things like that, because it can be clean and bland, and I'm like, I'm uninspired in here. But then if it's like, if I've bought like at this point, like I've bought pieces of art, I've gotten some things that kind of embody the things I believe in and kind of work towards, that kind of surround me. You know, how does that look for you? How does home in you know, the ways that, you know, it affects like your productivity, like your kind of frame of mind, like how does that look for you?
Yeah, it definitely affects me in all those ways. I make my bed the first thing every morning because it's a studio, and so I have to I think living in a studio has made every single piece and part of this space have to be intentional. Particularly, I'm kind of like that anyway, but there's no doors to shut. There's no like, oh, I'll just deal with that later. And, you know, there's no avoidance. So like it's cool though, because then even very like functional pieces for me, they have to become pieces of art too. So like even my bed being made, what my bed looks like, those are all like, it takes up so much space that it has to be something visually pleasing for me. Or even like all of my cabinets are open, and so it's like lining up my mugs or glasses or spices in a way that the colors are beautiful together and things like that. It's honestly so fun. It's like a mindfulness practice, I think, for me, or it has become that for me, because it just makes me pay attention and be more aware of these things that I take for granted or can take for granted, and actually how beautiful they are. So yeah. It definitely influences me.
Yeah, it sounds like you're a lot more disciplined than me in the sense of keeping that stuff together. Because I definitely was not the person who was making my bed up every day, like first thing. I know it's like it's one of those things where like a lot of people say that it makes you more productive, like if you have that rhythm in your life. So I probably should have that, but yeah, that's I lived in a studio apartment in Raleigh. Like those who've seen, some of my earlier tutorials and earlier durag thoughts, you've seen that space, and a lot of people have commented on that, and it's like somebody thought my house was a green screen, like like someone had commented on the 8th Street style self portrait tips video, and they really thought that like that spot was a green screen. I'm like, no, it's just called shallow depth of field and a really dope spot. And,
Yeah.
it's like, that's all it is. And it was just, I was really intentional about that space, but it was like so clean looking to them that there's no way that this is actually this person's apartment. And it's like, no, it really is. Some people have said before, it's like, if you didn't have like that piece of color, like on, I would have thought that your room, like that you had this video in black and white or something, because like you get a lot of monochromatic stuff with me. And I'm like, I just, a little monochromatic and then a pop of color, like, because then it makes you pay attention to the color a lot more. And so it's like, yeah, it's like if my whole house is like black and white, and so like you're seeing, my couch is gray, right? So you've got this like range, these shades, right? So I've got a gray couch, I've got like, the bookcase is espresso, even though I wanted a white one, but Walmart didn't have that, and I was in Tennessee at the time, so I'm not hitting up IKEA. Was I in Tennessee at the time? I don't remember where I think I was. Yeah, I was in Tennessee at the time, and I wasn't hitting up IKEA because IKEA is not closed.
Nope.
And delivery from IKEA costs an arm and a leg. And so, yeah, so it was like, I'm not interested in that. And so, got a brown one because it was there. And then like my other stuff, like had like some wood. My coffee table was wooden, but then I destroyed that by mistake. That was a bad day. Then I was gonna put it back together, and then that didn't work together, and I just gave up on it, threw it away. So R.I.P. coffee table. You served me well while I refinished you in Bristol, Tennessee, and if you've listened to Heritage of Hate, you've learned about this coffee table. So that coffee table, R.I.P. it doesn't exist anymore. But yeah, a lot of my stuff is really like it's sat within that. But then like, okay, then you look at the photo books or poetry books or whatever that are sitting on my coffee table, like then it has like, pops of like, these oranges, reds, even like some of the stuff that's sitting behind me. Like I've got these one of my homies, Brian Butler, shout out Brian, gave me a couple of years ago. I was like, sometimes I struggle reading my Bible because it looks boring. Like I was like, it's just like you read all these bunched up words together. It's not designed well. Like it feels like a textbook. It doesn't feel like this love letter, which I understand that like all the Bible's not a love letter, but still it's like it doesn't feel like, oh yes, I'm trying to grow in intimacy, with this person of God, right? And so like I don't really want to do this. And then my boy Brian was like just out random sometime when I was living in Raleigh, just said like, yo, what's your address? And so he and I found out these things are not cheap. So like Brian, I said thank you back then, but then I found out the price, and I'm like, good Lord, why did you spend this on me? But there are these.
You're worth it.
Yeah, well, thank you, homegirl. But those they're these things, these like Alabaster. I think the company's called Alabaster Co. And they're books of the Bible, and he got me like the 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, from like this company. And you can see one kind of behind me. You probably won't be able to see it just the angle you're at, but it says Matthew on it. It's the book of Matthew, and it's got like on the front of it these big like serif letters, and then it's got like under that it's got blue background, this like stone, which might be alabaster. I haven't looked into it, but I imagine if they're called alabaster. And it's a white stone, right? And then like the inside layout is like photo and then like, you know, like chunk of text, right? And it's really well laid out and minimalistic and stuff, and it's just, it looks a lot better.
Wow, that sounds amazing.
Yeah,
Check that out.
I'll have to show you this.
Yeah, I want to see it. That's
because
so cool.
I would pull it down, but then it'll kill the vibe of my shelf, and I can't do that right now.
I wouldn't ask you to. we can check it out later.
But yeah, they're super dope. In the way that they're laid out, and I remember there was that, and then there was another like Bible series that came out that was like a way better laid out Bible in terms of like typeface and stuff like that. Biblioteca, I think that was what it was called. My boy Matthew, the person this album's dedicated to, my boy that died of leukemia in 2018. I'm trying to think if at this point people would have heard about him on Fear Lane, and then also would have heard about him on Process Place, which is the track before this. So yeah, you've heard a good bit about Matthew and met Brittany and stuff if y'all paid attention to this season. If you haven't, go pay attention. But yeah, so Matthew got that set, the Biblioteca joint, like that Bible for Brittany, and it took like 2 years. It was like a Christmas present. It took like 2 years for it to actually show up, because I think they were still like in the Kickstarter phase and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah.
But there's something about just like design and like well laid out stuff that like brings me in. It encourages me to do something. And it's sometimes like why I'm more likely to read something off a computer or a tablet than I am to like hold a book in my hand and just sit there. When it comes to like certain books, like even when it comes to theology books, like, oh man, I haven't told you this story before. So like we had this class, this Greek class at the seminary when I had come in, and we were using this book for Greek class that it was like Greek to me, and it was like in Comic Sans, the whole book.
Oh my god.
The whole book was in Comic Sans. It had these like weird cartoonish characters. And I'm like, what in the hell is this book? And it's like, we're in a seminary, we're reading this book, and like the professor stood by it because the vocabulary was really robust. But I hated that book because I'm like, you don't understand, dog. Like, it's really difficult for me to look at this book. Like, this is hard for me to like get prepared for class. Like, this thing looks terrible. And I like
my body just tenses up. That's terrible.
Yeah, and like on top of that, like the book, like all like so many of the examples that it gave of like Greek sentences was like using the term doulos, which doulos means slave or like bondservant in the New Testament. And so I'm like, all right, I get that like this was a term that was like used, but it ain't gotta be every practice sentence. Like, can we get something different? And like I had a conversation with the professor about this. I'm like, yo, there's like a fixation with slaves for this fool who wrote this book, and I don't like it. I don't like it at all. It's like, as a black man in America, that's a problem. But yeah, the whole joint was in Comic Sans, and I'm like, what is this book? Can you like redesign this? Like, if this is better or whatever. And I don't know if they were trying to make it more approachable or whatever, but it made it detestable to me. Like, and so design, like layout, things like that. I mean, it can draw me in, or it can really, really push me away from doing something, from engaging in a space, for wanting to be around something. And I just find with home, I have to engage those senses for me in order to feel kind of, I don't know, at home, put together in that way. So.
Yeah, for sure. Do you think that most people are affected by those things, those like nuances, and just by design and taste, even like on a subconscious level? I think even the psychology behind color and whatnot is like, I think everybody's affected by these things. And I mean, I always think like, if we believe we're created in the image of God, God is obviously pretty creative. And so it's it only makes sense that we're affected by those things, I think. So I cut myself some slack sometimes when I'm just like, okay, well, this is literally the way we were created. It's okay that I'm like this.
Yeah, I mean, I think even when it comes to like even on a subconscious level, like we might be on a higher scale of that because of like who we are, as creative people, as photographers, as people who are consistently doing and consuming creative work. Because I think there's some people who are like, they can have a super messy room and like just like have stacks of whatever and then be like some gaming god, like just have their gaming chair and like everything's messy and stuff like that. Not that like professional gamers are like slobs, but there are some people who are professional gamers who are slobs. Like it's like it's just a reality. I'm not saying that's all. I'm just saying that there's probably some, and there's certain people that can like really really function well in mess because it doesn't really affect them as much. But you can feel a difference when you walk into different spaces. At least for me, like the Willow Tree coffee house out in Johnson City. Like, may you rest in peace. I saw that post recently that it's closing down.
No.
But which wildly, us talking about this project for the first time was in Willow Tree. So
I know
it holds some significance of memories for us and our friendship.
For sure. But
Willow Tree feels very different than Dos Gatos, which is also another 100%. Coffee house. And it's like you get a completely different vibe, a completely different energy from those two different spaces. And you can feel when you can walk into someone's home and the colors are like warmer rather than if you walk into a hospital and like how blue it feels and
clinical and sterile.
Yeah, exactly. It's a different, you get a different vibe, a different energy from those different spaces. So even if you're not like consciously consuming that, or even like the smell of a space, right? Like, there was a level with like, I felt like the wrestling room that I wrestled in at King, we were in like the basement of a building. We like the in front of the windows there's like these like chain, it wasn't chains, but it was like gating kind of, I don't know really what to call it. And then so, and it's like within this kind of dip of the like the hills going down at King, and then there's like kind of like a dip area where there's bars and stuff, and then you've got these like windows that are letting in just the faintest bit of light, and these like, it's just really really old. It just felt like a dungeon. And like the mats at that time weren't new and refinished or anything like that, so it felt like you were like going to war in a dungeon, and it didn't necessarily feel like, oh, this is an inviting space that I want to be a part of, coming from like my high school, which was built in 2001, and I went 2006 to 2010. So it was like stupid new, and the wrestling room was like really open, had all this padding in it, was way bigger. Had like next door was the weight room, and at first like there was like glass windows between the two, so you could see in the wrestling room, and then to the weight room, which is actually very stupid because wrestlers fly into walls, and so like in the beginning, before I ever got there used to be people at wrestling practice, they would have like people standing in front of the windows to try to keep people from falling into it. And so then one time somebody was like trying to keep some people from falling into it, and they stepped back and their heel hit the glass window and it shattered the glass. And so at that point they decided to move it to like, they put a bunch of padding in front of those windows. So the architectural design, I'm sure, felt terrible at that point, but like that was like, that space was just way bigger, more spacious. It was like the walls were white with like blue mats. There was nice contrast. It just felt like a more inviting space to wrestle. And I enjoyed my wrestling experience in high school quite a bit more than my college wrestling experience. And I do think that probably played some part of it, And so, yeah, I think certain spaces, like you said, even if it's unconscious, um, and people don't think that they're affected by it, there absolutely are. You know that a hospital feels different than a library, then feels different than your grandma's house, then feels different than, you know, a place that is more minimalistic, than a place that feels, you know, more like, you know, like maybe you're like your mom's house or your dad's house, like, you know, and what some of those spaces are kind of designed like, and even the lighting choices, like, is it more natural light, is it a bunch of like tungsten light, are you seeing a bunch of fluorescent bulbs in a space, like what, like how all these different spaces are playing out and affecting you, you know?
It's really true. And even just like where pictures are hung and how high. I love walking into spaces, and oftentimes oftentimes you know how tall the person who hung the pictures are based on where they're hung on the walls. Even just like little nuances like that. I just find it really fascinating. There's so many you can walk into, especially different people's homes, and just tell so much about those people that live there, and I just find that wildly fascinating.
Yeah.
But I think to go back, even I'm thinking about the two different coffee shops, and like the different energy that were in them, or just walking into a friend's house, and you know the difference of when, like, oh, people sit on this couch regularly, and then you see a couch, and you know when people don't sit on it. And so then it's like, even subconsciously or consciously, it's like then you internalize that, and is like, is this a couch for me? Is this like a couch that I can take my shoes off and put my feet on? Is it not? Do people sit here? Do they not? And it's like, you can pick up all of those things, all of that information, if you're paying attention. And I don't know, it just is so wild to me. And I think like, even I think that's why belonging is the word that comes up for me when I think of home and space. And it doesn't have to be, it for sure does not have to be a space filled with the most expensive things or the, nicest things or whatever. It's just, is it a space that that I'm free to be myself in? Do I have to leave things at the door? And if I don't, that if I can show up as my full and authentic self, then I feel safe and I feel like I belong there. And it so often, all of the details, all of the things that we curate our spaces with, they do matter, but then at the same time, they don't matter at all. When there's safety and belonging there. Like I would never design my house like my grandparents, but my grandparents is hands down one of the most safest places I've ever been. I knew what to expect. I knew I was welcome. I was wanted. I could jump on the couch. Probably they might not like that, but it never meant that I couldn't come back or that I wouldn't be welcome. And so it's funny how I'm just thinking about how interesting it is that like all of these details and aesthetics and design, they matter, but then at the same time, they don't matter at all.
Yeah. Well, because it's experience.
Yeah, for sure. When it comes to like what is home, what makes a home, it's a both and.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, in the piece Return Road, I say, they say home is where the heart is, but I must be heartless because I don't know where that is anymore. And it was like, even for me within that space of time in my life, I'm trying as much as I can to not break down these pieces for people because I want it to like live and breathe is what it is. But like that line is really potent for me. It's like, trying to build a home in people's hearts, but that not necessarily being trustworthy, or, proving that, within time, right? It's like all of a sudden, like it can sour an environment, like some place that has felt like home. It can become like changed in some way. It's like my friend Brittany, I remember at Matthew's funeral, Brittany is Matthew's widow. I remember she didn't want smells. Like she didn't want, she wasn't gonna wear cologne. She didn't want people like coming up to her with any of those things, because she didn't want to be reminded of the pain of that day every time she like took in a scent. Like she didn't want those sensory kind of like connections to things. And I remember that really vividly, that was something that she really protected on that day. And I think like, it's like you said, your grandparents' house, like the layout and everything like that, it like may feel funky and stuff in comparison to like what you would do in your own home and what you have done in your own home, in your own space. But there's a safeness associated with like how this thing looks. And so, you know, even if you were to take some of those pieces from their home, you know, and I don't know if you have some of those pieces of their home in your house right now.
No, I do.
Exactly. And so like it's like, I imagined that was going to be a thing, but I didn't want to assume. I should have assumed. But you have some of those pieces of home within your space, but it's like, how have you reappropriated in that? Like, how have you like grafted that in to your home, right? It's like how, and it's like, it's different than what the tree of their home kind of looked like, what that tree of life in their home looked like, the tree of life in your home looks like. You know, how am I going to put this in and make it mesh and become a part of my space? And it looks different and it matches more of your style and your vibe, you know, or it's a complete outlier in the midst of the space, but you know why it's an outlier, and it draws someone to that piece. And it's like, why? Well, that looks way different than everything in here. Like, why is that in here? It's like, oh, let me tell you the story. You know, there's something that it's pointing to. Like and so like, even with something that someone might say like, this is the most incredibly designed space that anyone could ever be in, that can become really sour for someone if they experience trauma there. You know,
for sure.
And so they're like, I can't deal with Scandinavian design, because when last time I was like functioning a lot in Scandinavian design, like that reminds me of when I was in art school and I was, you know, berated by professors and abused, you know, like verbally by them. This is not an experience of mine, people. This is it's just a scenario I'm making up, hypothetical. But yeah, like even something that might be like, oh yeah, this is good in the space of design, like this is it might not be the same. Like I imagine like award shows weren't the same necessarily for Taylor Swift at first after the Kanye incident. You know, I imagine that she had some tensions in walking up on stage and stuff, you know, because of what those environments looked like and some of the stuff that would be experienced there, you know?
Yeah, and the meaning that we attach to it, or in what our experiences around it are. I mean, I think that so often I struggle with, I often struggle with getting like letting go of things, or like actual tangible things, or, you know, just sometimes, not always, but then like one day I was just like, oh, these things are only meaningful because of the meaning I attach to them. And so just because the actual item is gone, because I've had, you know, you have things stolen, it feels like it feels like, I don't know, it's awful. And so you lose this item per se, but that doesn't mean the meaning of it is gone. And that was just like, it was such a pivotal moment in my life when I realized that like all of these things around me only have meaning because I attach meaning to it. And so if they are with me, or if they're not, I can still hold that meaning close because it's the experiences around it. And even just like the few items that I do have of my grandparents, I think it's fascinating too, because you're right. Like sometimes they're outliers, but then if people know you, or as they're getting to know you, they realize it's not an outlier. And somehow we end up like blurring those lines of like, this is a part of me, and it just like seems to fit. You know, you walk into somebody's house and you're like, this totally shouldn't work, but it does. And it's really because there's nothing new under the sun anyway. It's just this new mashup of like, I feel like things feel new because there's a mashup of things that maybe I haven't seen together before. And so anyway, yeah, it's kind of rambly, but
no, you're good. You're good.
Those things came up for me when we were talking about that, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I think about like, it's like, all right, my camera. I love my camera. It's great. But like, if it got stolen, I was like, I mean, as long as I can get another one relatively soon, I'd be fine. As long as, as long as you didn't steal the SD card that was in there, and I had, or if you stole it, that I had dropped the footage already, you know, we're Gucci. But if you steal a hard drive, oh, I'm effed up. Like, that's like, I would rather you steal my like, if somebody was like, give me your stuff, I'd be like, all right, you can have my computer, you can have my camera, you can have whatever. Just, let me keep the hard drives, like, just let me keep them. Because like the computer, I got backed up onto a hard drive. Like the footage of like I can't get back those memories. Like, in the middle of this, I feel like we talked about this, you know, at some point in a text message. Like, I had a hard drive crash during the process of making this record, and luckily it wasn't the record, like, it wasn't the one that had this stuff on it, but it had work from like 2016 to 2019 on it. And so I was like, oh my God, like, how much work am I gonna lose? But at the same time, I also had felt like I hadn't totally stepped into making everything I was made to make, because I'd been in seminary and I'd been working at this church full time and like doing all these things that made it difficult to make a bunch of art that kind of sat within my vein, right? And so I was like, I wouldn't lose too much, but it would still suck to lose some of the stuff that's on there. And then even with some of the things that I have that just aren't really replaceable, like, you know, my boy Matthew, going back to him, he gave me a Nat King Cole record. And like, when I was first getting into records more, well, it wasn't when I was first getting into it. I've been into records for a couple of years because my brother's into records, and that was a bonding spot for us. But then also, like, I wanted to support artists in a more tangible way, in a bigger way, because I was never going to use the CD. I would just like, it'd be like you buy a CD to get the digital download and toss the CD, or like you buy a CD and you're burning the stuff to the computer, which we don't even do anymore. It's like, I couldn't even buy a CD these days, because what the heck am I going to put a CD into? Like, you know,
yeah.
I don't even know if my car has like a CD player joint in it anymore.
Yeah, mine doesn't.
Exactly. So like, it's like, it would be like I'm buying a digital download and that's it. And so it's like, I don't even know where some of that stuff sits, right? And so I was like, vinyl's a different listening experience. Like, it sounds different. It's a higher quality sound, and I get to see artwork bigger, and I get to support artists. This is a no-brainer. I mean, it's expensive as a champ if you actually are like investing a lot into it, because a lot of records these days are like, you know, 25, 30, sometimes 40, $45, you know. For some record. I can't remember how much Kendrick's Damn was for me, but I got the version where I could also get a signed gatefold from him. And so I imagine that cost me like $45-50. And so it's like there's also like a level of how expensive that is. But like, when I was kind of getting into where I'd been into vinyl for a couple of years, and my friend Matthew knew about that, he gave me a Nat King Cole record. He's like, this is one of my favorite joints. And so for me, it's like, I mean, that's a memento of our friendship, and you know, it's something that kind of lives on and breathes within this space of time, you know. And so there's certain things and certain pieces where it's like don't take this. And then there's some times where it's like, I feel like there's a sense of like needing to like move on past certain things, because like sometimes we can hold on to moments and stuff like that through like, I don't want to give this, you know, this thing up. Like I don't want to give up. It's like if I throw this away, I'm like committing that this relationship with this person is over. You know, I'm committing that. I mean, it's the significance of like, you know, something like an engagement ring or a wedding ring or something like that. Like to take off that thing is to, it's like I've taken off the symbol of what that has been assigned to that. Or, you know, if I throw away this letter or these group of letters, or I throw away this book, or so it's like there's all sorts of different things that can kind of sit within that space of like, what am I assigning worth to, and like, you know,
and closure. Sometimes it's just closure, and it's like those things can still have worth, but you don't need the actual tangible item for that worth to remain. You just need it's a part of, sometimes they're a part of a season, and the letting go of is closure. And I think that could be really beautiful in its own way too.
Yeah, I mean that stuff is therapeutic, you know.
It really is.
Yeah, I mean, there's certain spaces where it's like you have to let go because like you're choosing to hold on to something too tight, and you gotta let it go. And I think, yeah, I mean, there's been plenty of things like that in my life. There's also been things that I've reinstilled life into. Like I've like reclaimed the meaning, right? It's like, you know,
what's an example?
Yeah, so a relationship with my pops, right? It's a really rocky road, right? You know, he's absent most of my life, and you know, if you listen to Brave Boulevard, you've heard some of that, and we kind of I won't say restarted, but like reintroduced him into my life. More so from a space of a friend for me, because I feel like you've missed most of my life, man. It's kind of hard to raise me at this point. I'm a grown ass man, you know.
Yeah.
But there was a time where like he had a bunch of stuff in storage in Virginia Beach when we were kids, and my mom just kind of let us like take whatever we wanted. And he has a green trench coat, and it's like an army green trench coat. And I like long coats. I like trench coats. Watch a lot of anime. Long coats have been a part of anime for a long time. Like Gambit was like my favorite X-Men. Like these are things that like speak to me. Just something about like high collars and like long coats. It's like I love a good crop trench coat as well, but like those lengths, like sometimes those lengths are just like, they get to me. And so
Yeah.
That's a piece I've been wearing since like junior year of high school. Like that trench coat has been a piece that I've worn since like junior year of high school, and it fits me perfectly. It looks almost as if it was tailored for me. And I don't put it on and like it does like to remind me of trauma or anything. Like it just feels like this is mine. Like I've taken a role. It's like I've done fine without you being present, you know. I've done fine without you necessarily doing your job, man. And so, you know, I rock that coat proudly. I still rock that coat when it's, you know, appropriate weather, you know. Sometimes I was like, I mean, as a kid, there were definitely times where I was like trying to rock it too early. Like, you know, when like you're really excited to wear that like jacket or something, and you're like, yo, it's too hot for that jacket. But I'm like, but there's not enough layers. And so like I was definitely that kid, and I wore that coat a lot, and I still wear that coat quite a bit. And so that was something that like I really kind of took and reclaimed meaning of. And then even like, I mean, my dad gave me a bunch of records, right? Like in seminary, actually, he gifted me a ton of jazz, a ton of classical records and things like that. And in a sense, it's a connection point for us. I don't listen to a ton of classical music, although I found out in seminary why my dad listened to a bunch of classical music in my headspace. I made this like, and this might not be accurate, but this is what I feel. So my dad's an MD, OBGYN, and he listened to a ton of classical music when I was a kid, And I was like, this is just really interesting. And then I realized, like, with studying for grad school, I can't listen to a bunch of music with words in it because it'll distract me from the crap I'm trying to learn. And so if I just turned on some classical music or some movie scores were my thing.
They're so wonderful.
Yeah.
What's your favorite?
Well, see, I just would have a mix on Spotify of just a bunch of stuff. And so, you know, I've never seen Harry Potter, but I would listen to like Harry Potter scores at some points. I would listen to, sometimes there would be like the Lion King scores I can't listen to because I think they're really incredible, but I know all the moments. Like,
yes,
they're so good. And so like, I'll get teary-eyed and just like be in this moment. And it's like, I know like that Simba's looking at Mufasa and I'm about to freaking cry because they're just, it's a masterful work. I can't remember the dude who did it, Hans Zimmer. Like, Hans Zimmer's work is so incredible, and it's like, it's made in a way that it causes you to remember that moment. And so I'm like, frick, like I can't do that, you know, I can't press into this. And so I have to go into a different movie score that I don't know, because, you know, I will stop my working and then just be like, and just sitting there in those moments, you know? So what about you? Like what movie scores are like top tier for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've never thought about this until we were talking about it, but I don't listen to movie scores of movies I've seen. And it's for that exact reason, because I'm too much of a like visual learner. So yeah, I usually just find random things and I just know if I like it or not immediately, like intuitively, but I usually don't revisit the same thing. So I don't even know if I have a favorite. I think that's why I was like super curious if you did. But yeah, I've never thought about that, but I definitely don't. I don't listen to scores from movies I've seen if I'm trying to do work.
Yeah.
Because I get way too distracted too. It's really fascinating.
I was watching, so there's a YouTube channel that unfortunately like they stopped making stuff like new stuff like 3 years ago, but it's got like 1 million plus like subscribers, and it's called Every Frame and Painting. And so they're like breaking down like different like, you know, aspects of movies and techniques and different things like that. And so there's an episode on scoring, and it's talking about like how certain scores are, and some like they're doing like kind of man on the street interviews, like person on the street interviews, and they're asking people like, what you know does the soundtrack for this sound like what is the and so then like, you know, people would do like the Spider-Man, like, or the Spider-Man theme was like the only like Marvel one that they were like, it's memorable because, you know, Spider-Man, you know, that joint is just incredibly memorable. But they're like, all right, so hum or sing or whatever the theme to like Harry Potter, to Lion King, to like, and they give them a bunch of things, and like everyone can like go off, and they're like, all right, give me like a song from the like Avengers, give me a song from, and they're like going the things that like the scores aren't as memorable, and then people can't really do them, and they start explaining like why. And I can't totally remember. I mean, I think it had a lot to do with people were like creating original scores and stuff in the past, and they were like watching the movie and like making these original things. But then a lot of people in these ages are like, I want to score like this, and so they're not allowing people to like feel out the story and play through and compose it the way that it needs to be composed, and really invoke that emotion. And so I find that super interesting. But yeah. Keep going. Go.
No, it's totally wild. It's a whole, I mean, music is a whole language in and of itself, and it's all about the, you know, the principles of design, whether there's like symmetry and composition and balance, and those things are in music also. And that's often the things that I pay attention to. Do you see color when you listen to music? different
No,
colors.
I am definitely not. I don't have synesthesia, but if you have synesthesia, I'm really jealous of you. Do you have synesthesia?
I don't think so, but I often just yeah, I don't really know. I need to like figure out if I do or not. Or I always see like I see the different like elements of design within music, and I often pay attention more to music than I pay attention to or notice, I guess, the music first before words, even in a piece of music.
Uh-huh.
And I remember as a kid, I listened to like Vivaldi's Four Seasons, and every time I listened to it, I could just make up a new visual scene in my head. It's so visceral and so, I don't know. It's so visual for me. Those pieces are. I just
So
find it fascinating.
so with the painting behind you, right? Does when you look at that, do you hear music? Like do you see sounds in some of the colors of those things, or is it just reversed for you? If you are hearing music, you see visuals.
Yeah, if I hear music, I don't see sounds when I look at that painting.
Okay. My boy Tay the producer, the dude
Yeah.
who scored all of City of God.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that on the episode me and Tay do for Durag Thoughts, but he scored City of God. He didn't produce it first. So it wasn't like he gave me beats and then I you know, wrote to those, which is like how a lot of rappers do. It's like, no, I was like, I want you to score this record. Like, these are the pieces I want. I didn't even do like my poems to like a BPM or anything. It was just like, this is what I naturally want these to feel like. Have at it. And so then he scored from there. And so, but Tay is someone who sees sounds. Like he is a bit of synesthesia, which like Kanye is one of those people as well. And so, yeah, I think he's like, you know, he's like that. See, that looks like a snare right there, and like that joint right there, like that right there, like that's a deep bass. And I'm like, this is crazy, cuz this is not real. Like, how are you doing this? It's like when that idea was first presented to me, I'm like, that is insane that is something that people can do. That like
yeah, for sure.
But so going in that and tying that into the conversation that we're in, right? Music affects spaces, right? It's like,
For sure.
you know, you can go and, all right, for instance, right? I tell churches who be talking to me about like diversity and stuff, I'm like, all y'all play is music that like, it's like, I understand. In my opinion, Black people are kind of the root of like all music in America and in the US America. And so it's like there's a lot of history that would point to that Black people are the history of US American music.
True.
And so but like stuff that is more currently like kind of known as more white music, like white US American music, is what was consistently playing. Like, you know, more church music that is like white evangelical church related. So you got a bunch of Hillsong, you got Mosaic, you got, you know, Jesus Culture, you got, you know, those sort of places, right? You don't have gospel, you don't have jazz, you don't have blue, like you don't have these other elements playing in, like you don't have any hip hop, you don't. So then like people are coming into your church, but they're not hearing themselves in your space.
Yeah, it's belonging again.
Exactly. And so I'm like, yo, it's like, especially like in times like Christmas and Easter, I'm like, y'all don't have no Black nothing in here. How you expect to have Black people up in here feeling like they at home and they gonna come back or tell somebody about this when everything y'all do is just white? Like there, and so like that was a critique that I gave my. It's like I gave my old supervisor at the last church I was at, I gave him like a breakdown of like just some simple things that he could do to make the space, like we could do to make the space more inviting for Black people, right? And one of the things I gave was music. And the space is like, you have to diversify these playlists. Like you need to add in music that would, You might need to add in some merengue. You might need to add in, some more Latin music. You might need to add in, you know, some some more black cultural reference music. If you're in a space like, where you're having more African people come in, you might need to add in some African influenced music. You have more Russian people coming in, like add in some like Russian influenced music or something. Like add something that speaks to these people, because you're not making your space inviting for all of the different people. And so like, if you come from a household where like music was constantly playing, you get a feel for that. A lot of black kids have like memories of like Saturday mornings when it's like time to clean up, and then it's just like you're playing a bunch of like Kirk Franklin super loud, Donnie McClurkin, Fred Hammond. Like you got a lot of black elements and black gospel elements and stuff that come a part of a morning, and so those things become infused. Yeah, and I think that so affects the space. It's like when I moved into the spot that I was living at in, at Emmanuel, in the Emmanuel Village, I had a roommate there, and I, like, one of the first things I did was I got like, when it came to like designing a space, because he didn't really have a design for anything. Like he collected beer, and so he just had beer bottles lining. It was like I walked in, there was like beer bottles lining the cabinets, and I was like, is this dude an alcoholic? But they were like craft beers, and so it was like, okay, he's probably not an alcoholic, because you wouldn't have nice looking beers if that was what it was. And he wasn't an alcoholic, he was a beer enthusiast. And so but I was like, okay, I need to add in like my sense of space here. And so it's like I put up a black and white American flag is my thing. And then I added in situations like my this record shelf, actually, which was probably when I bought this, and then I put in all those records and had my like turntable downstairs and stuff. And that was it was an important part for me of like being able to infuse music in that space and stuff. I used to do this series, which I want to get back to when I have some time. It was called Went to Live. And I did one in seminary, no lights or anything. That was just about like records and their meaning for me. And just like kind of creating a space as home. And the record that I had on play within that time, like in that video, was Solange's A Seat at the Table. And so, Solange is talking about like making, like, we're just gonna make a seat for ourselves. Like we're gonna, like we're black and we are going to belong. Like we're going to create that kind of space. Right. But for me, I don't know, like that, it speaks to that sense in space of like home and belonging. And it's really interesting that was the piece or the record that I chose to play in that moment. But yeah, I think music plays a lot into the conversation of home and making someplace feel
safe.
Yeah, safe and like you belong.
Yeah, it's definitely, I mean, it's such a sensory experience, and there's like because we're all made up of energy, and it's this transference of energy, whether it's the people that are in the space, or the music, or like you said, the smells, visuals. It's all of those things. And it's safety. And then it's like, we're mind, I believe we're mind, body, and spirit. So it's like sometimes, like, even cognitively, I know I'm safe in a space, but then my body might not feel safe in that space. And that might be like a past or like a history or whatever. But I think to create spaces where many people feel like they are where they belong, where they're wanted. And it's a very intentional practice. And I do think that it's a practice because I think it's like we're always learning things, and so we're always changing them. And so it's this fluid thing to create spaces that can be home for people, and for all of us, really.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
What's essential for you in a space for you to feel like it's home for you? Like, what are some of like the elements of like design in your home and stuff like that you feel like are really important for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I attach a lot of meaning to things, and there's a lot of history to the things that are in my spaces. Obviously, I'm a 4, so like sometimes we live in the past a little bit. But so there's a lot of old pieces in my home. There's a lot of pieces that have been given to me. It all has a story. I like things that are, unique and rare and whatnot. And it doesn't have to be expensive. It's just there's something about it that there's stories that lie within those things, and they have interest to them. I grew up in the middle of the hollers of East Tennessee. And so, we had like a half-mile long driveway and lived down in a valley, didn't have neighbors. And so we had a bunch of acreage. I think we had like over 100 acres where I grew up. And then our property butted up against the Cherokee National Forest. So as a kid, I lived there for my entire childhood. And as a kid, nature was my safe space. There was just a lot of trauma and abuse that happened in our family. And so home as a sense of a house, physical structure, was not often safe, but I had all this nature around me that I knew I could walk out the back door and be safe. And so even today, there's a lot of natural elements in my home. There's a lot of just like darker wood and just older items. I have a bunch of, as a kid, I would like collect just old remnants of things. Whether this kind of sounds ridiculous, but it's my story, so
It doesn't sound ridiculous to me.
Thank you. I would collect snake skins or like dried, like old turtle shells, different feathers or driftwood, things that had transitioned from like life back into the dirt. And I find all those things so beautiful. And so I always collected them as a kid, and I definitely still find myself collecting those things. And so there's a lot of elements like that. And I was thinking about this when you were talking about the green trench coat, because what I heard when you were telling me that is a lot of bravery and courage in taking something. Again, it's belonging. It's like, even with a strained relationship, your dad's still a part of you. And I hear a lot of bravery in accepting that. And I think there's a lot of healing in accepting that, regardless of what your relationship has been in the past, and like I hear you leaving space for it to be in the future. You still have this coat that's like, yeah, this was my dad's, and I enjoy wearing it because, and you're a part of your dad. Like I don't have a great relationship with my dad either. And I was thinking about this jewelry box that he gave me. I guess I was probably in my 20s, and my middle name's Rose. And this jewelry box is like really, really awesome. And it has roses etched into it. And when I think of my dad, I'm like, you don't know me at all. Like, you know nothing about me. But then when he gave me this jewelry box out of the blue and it had roses on it, I know that my dad is an intentional person enough to know that, like, obviously he picked out the jewelry box because it has roses on it and gave it to me. And he doesn't have to tell me that. I know that. And so it made me feel known. And so I've always kept that jewelry box, not because I have a super close relationship, but it's this tangible reminder that I'm known by somebody who I share DNA with, who it's a reminder that, like, it's a reminder of my existence in some sense. And yeah, so anyway, that's kind of like rambling off tangent, but there's a lot of, in my space now, I'm kind of surprised how many elements of my childhood and of my childhood I still embrace and still find safe to include, which I think is really sweet.
Yeah, I think that's really dope and important. I mean, because your childhood is still, I mean, it's a lot of what made you, even
for sure.
even if childhood is filled with trauma, like, you know, it's like even the process of overcoming or healing through those spaces and stuff, like, it still forms who we become, who we're raised as, and then who like what we have to overcome in the midst of those spaces. I mean, I think a lot for me, you know, when it comes to that trench coat, is like I look the most like my dad of all my siblings. You know, people have always said that since I was little, and then, you know, into adulthood. I mean, my facial hair is like the most similar to his. Like, my brother doesn't grow as much of a beard as me, in the same spaces, and my head is shaped like the most like his, and I wear glasses and all these things. So, like, me and my dad have a kinship within those spaces, right? And for me, you know, I spent like my last couple of years of high school, you know, it's a time where, like, dudes, like, puberty's on 10, like, hormones are on 10, and so you're already gonna, like, experience a lot more aggression and stuff from dudes probably in that time of life. But I was wrestling with a lot of the stuff that it meant to be me as a kid, and, like, you know, rock through, you know, stuff with my pops. And so then it was also like the trench coat was a way to, like, reclaim like a legacy, because it was like, yeah, my dad didn't do a great job, you know, through me growing up, right? And so it's like, I'm not gonna be burdened by, you're not, like, you didn't meet the standard of what you should have, you know. It's like, I'm going to live a better legacy of the name Went than you did. I'm gonna live a better legacy. Like, I'm gonna embody this frame better than you did, and what that means. I mean, like, I wrote him a poem in when I was in junior year of high school, that was called The Death of Fatherless. And I think, like, what I gotta find that poem. I imagine I imagine I posted it to Facebook or something. I was a ballsy kid for sending that ish to him, because I did, and it was like, it was no joke. Like I said, like, Aaron's more of a dad than you, like was my older brother. Like, I was not playing, like he, like, it was, I mean, it was like a knockout punch combination. Like, I was not playing with him at all. And I think, like, I said, like, I'm redeeming this line, call it The Death of Fatherless, because I, like, one of the things I'd always do in poetry as a kid, because I wrote a lot of poetry in high school, and a lot of it was like love poetry, because I'm a sappy 4 and or freaking romantic, and so, like, even if it was, like, not directed at somebody, it's like, hi ladies, see, that's Trevor, He writes love poetry.
I love that.
I'm very good with words. I'll make you feel great. You know, it's like I will make you feel loved and empowered and all these things. And so I would a lot of times though name my poem based off the last line, or if I named a poem something that like that title would end up in the last line. I don't know why I haven't continued that.
Yeah.
I think it's such a, I mean, I don't know if anybody else does that, but I just think that joint is tight. Like
that is good.
It's like, nobody steal that from me. It's like, if somebody tries to steal that, you a biter. I'll lay this out right now. Like, that's how I rock. But yeah, I used to say, I said in that piece, like, I think the last line was, I'm redeeming this line called the death of fatherless. And that's what I felt. It's like, I'm gonna redeem the line of what it means to be a wimp, you know. It's like I'm not going to be what you lack to be for me. Yeah, and it's the aspects of like restoration and redemption, and you know, making all things new, you know, like trying to embody the Christness within myself, and like, you know, it's like I'm so tempted to give away like what the meaning of City of God is, but I'm not gonna do it because I want people to figure it out, but it has to do with me and who I am. Yeah, I just don't want to give it away. I think people should figure it out and dive deep in. But yeah, just that's some of the stuff that I think about when it comes to that. And I'm glad that you brought, you know, what that trench coat meant to you, and when I started talking about that, because I knew those things, but it, like, when you started talking again, I was like, oh yeah, like it started like reinstilling, like, or kind of igniting some of those thoughts of like what some of that, like what I was even like voicing as a high schooler and stuff like that, because, you know, like you kind of have like your present memory and the things that kind of get like put in the archives, and so it's not as easily accessible. It takes a little bit more to like kick it into high gear. And so yeah, I'm glad that you brought those things into the mix.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's real. I do see it's bravery, because it's so often when there's pain attached to something, it's so easy to reject everything that reminds you of that. And so to wear a trench coat, to make it part of your existence, your presence, especially as someone who's very intentional about the pieces they choose, yeah, I don't think that's anything other than bravery. And it's yeah, I think it's beautiful. Yeah, I mean that.
I think about, so when it comes to like MySpace, you know, kind of going off of what you were talking about, of like the things that are important to me, it's like I'm a minimalist in a lot of ways. I'm a minimalist with a little bit of crazy mixed in. Like, it's like I need order, and then I can have chaos within the order of like how I'm kind of setting stuff up. And so like, and I like clean lines and things like that. It's like, all right, if you know Jean-Michel Basquiat is?
I don't.
Oh, you need to look up Jean-Michel Basquiat. So
Okay.
Did you see the piece that I put on my IG stories that was called Lahara recently? That was like a police officer. Yeah. So that was a Basquiat piece. And so
okay, awesome.
Jean-Michel Basquiat it was like one of the most popular modern artists within like the 90s era, was like became like really good friends with Andy Warhol. If you've ever seen that crown, like it's like a hand-drawn crown that a lot of people take these days. That was Basquiat's crown that he would put on stuff. And so Basquiat was originally a street artist named Samo, which kind of it stood for same old shit, basically, which was kind of referring to like commentary, like social commentary on like what Black people would endure and stuff like that in the culture, right? And so Basquiat became like just this modern artist who's just like thrusted into popularity. He was a really polarizing figure because I mean you saw that piece, so you can see like some people might be like, I don't understand why this is selling for so much money. Like I could do this with a crayon. Like this looks like so elementary. But Basquiat had this sort of style, and he's a legend in some of those sort of ways. And unfortunately, like ended up overdosing on heroin, had a drug problem, had daddy issues. Like his dad was Haitian. I've lost you. But yeah, so his
So sorry.
it's all good. So his dad was Haitian. I don't know if his dad's still alive or not, but he was really hard on him and abusive and stuff. And his mom ended up moving away from his dad and stuff like that. It's just, yeah, his dad wasn't great to him. But his work was very like kind of chaotic in those senses, like of what some of the stuff that you've seen. And he would make a lot of work quickly. And it's like, so basically what I'm saying is like, if you made like a square and this is the order, and like there's a bunch of white space around it, but then like you put like Basquiat type work in it, and then there was like maybe a little bit of it like breaking out of the square and stuff, but there was still like a lot of the minimalism around it. I just find that controlled chaos is like that. I love that. Like that's, which I mean, in a lot of ways, like there's a sense of it that embodies me. Like if I was gonna have plants in my house, I would be like, all right, here's this like really dope minimalistic pot, but then I want this plant to be like going wild. Like it'd be some like big old green joint that's like going everywhere, because like that's some of the vibe that I want. Like even something like this pillow, it's like it's a square that you have, but then there's like all these just like random brush strokes on it. And I don't know. There's something to me like controlled chaos is fun, which sometimes I think about. Like I thought about that recently. I'm like, I need to put this more in my like graphics work and stuff like that, because that's some of the stuff I really like. But yeah, so I have like, I need like kind of minimalistic elements, kind of like monochrome stuff. So I like the IKEA kind of Scandinavian type design feels, and then the monochrome feels. I need like pops of color that are kind of, initiating within that, and then like pieces of home kind of sit within some of those spaces as well. And I try to figure out like how some of that stuff can kind of play together. My record player is really important and how that's set up. For a long time, I didn't have a TV. I just had a record player. Having a lot of natural light is super important for me. I need light. It just brings the energy. I can't have without it. And then, having like having a ton of records in the mix, but then I love big art. Like I love big prints. I've never liked printing my work small. That was something from the beginning of my photo career, like starting in college and stuff. Like I'd be like, how big can we print on this printer? Okay, I want that. And so I'd always want, it'd be like, we're going full bleed. I don't want anything showing but my work. We're going as big as we possibly can. I even bought like the camera I have, the Sony A7R II. It's a 42 megapixel camera. And I'm like, I want this as many megapixels as I can get for a cheap price, so I can blow it up to the size of the freaking, like the building. Now I understand that like you can have like lower megapixel cameras because it's all about viewing distance. It's like billboards. If you get up on a billboard, they're really pixelated because your viewing distance is so far away from them that you can't tell it's pixelated. And so, but for me, I was like, I want this ish as big as I can have it. And so that's who I am, and just how I kind of operate. And so yeah, those things are important for me. Having my art on display, but then having like other people's who've been influential for me. Like this shot can't particularly show it to people, but like, I've got like this print from an incredible photographer named Ray Spears, who goes by Ray Neutron on the internet. And it's this photo that's like taken in front of like an NYPD door in New York City, and it's got like a shadow of a black man with his hands up, and so like you only see the shadow like casting onto the door of this NYPD kind of in it like building, and so it's like you got this like brown like tan, you know, brick or whatever. Let me just look. Yeah, it's like cement blocks, and then you've got this contrast of this like stark blue NYPD logo and like blue door, and then you've got this like shadow coming into it, and it's like I've got that piece and I really love it. And so yeah, just like having some elements of like controlled chaos within the mix is so important to me, because I'm like, I got myself under control, but I'm also a little bit of a wild child. I mean, I wrestled for a reason. Like, you know, it's like I might seem gentle and stuff to people, but I still can slam you on your head. Like, there's an element. It's like I can. It's like if the situation was to pop off, I could beat the crap out of you, but I won't, because I have self-control. But also, don't try me. Like somebody, like Lecrae recently said, I'm safe, but my hands ain't. And so I don't, and it's like, technically I'm like a pacifist in a lot of ways, but I also don't know what's going to happen if you smack me, because like I have a lot of years of wrestling training. And so I don't know how my muscle memory is going to react if someone starts like going after me. So if I have to defend myself, I know that I have the ability to do that. And so there's a sense of control chaos within that. It's like, and some of those things pop out. Or even, hilariously, this is sitting under the thing. So like my boy Paris went to Africa last year and like got me this Afro pick that's like wooden and has just like some African art chilling on it, and brought it back as a souvenir. And so it's like, this isn't just some like minimalistic vibe chilling or something. Like this joint is like I had it like displayed, you know, next to like that piece of like the Ray Neutron piece and stuff, and it's just like it's a just different, interesting piece, and it's not perfectly symmetrical or anything, but yeah, it's like sitting on this like white, you know, 4-square kind of cabinet with like some of my jewelry and like, you know, these prints and things like that. And it's just some of the stuff that, I don't know, it, again, control chaos.
Yeah, it's contrast. It's the juxtaposition between like even like the not super straight, the very handmade lines versus the very like I guess just more straighter lines. But there's a lot of contrast. I see a lot of contrast in all the things that you like, and I love that.
Yeah, that's definitely a thing for me. I mean, which was funny because like when it comes to like shooting, I don't know. I mean, sometimes I do like low contrast visuals, but I found, so, you know, this is kind of getting off on another tangent, but you think about like we've had the conversation about presets versus, you know, like editing yourself and things like that. And I think that there's, you know, my mindset within the space of presets, because I've used presets in the past and I used presets for a couple of years. But I think the thing that was like a big thing for me with presets is like I started reverse engineering them and stopped using them as a crutch. Like I started figuring out what they were doing, and that taught me how to be a more creative editor. But when I just like put them away, right, and just recognize like, yo, you have the skills to do all this stuff. I don't know why you're relying on these. It was like I started really realizing like, even when I would like modify a preset to fit my vibe, which was most of the time, but it was like, I like subtle fades. I don't want really big fades. Like I don't need the black point to be like at 50. I need it to be at like 92. And then I need like and then I just like, I like a lot of pastels and things like that, but I like these deeper tones, like when it comes to color. And so I really like that. Like, you look at my page on Instagram or something, you can see that. If you scroll my feed, like, you see this tendency towards like richer, deeper tones, and it keeps happening. Like, you just figure out like what you naturally kind of lean towards, and so I do have like contrast there, but then I also kind of like, I limit it sometimes. Like, I'll crush those highlights because I don't want them to go all the way to white, because I just don't like how it looks sometimes. And so I'll crush the highlights and then push them. And so it's like you just got rid of them, but then you also push them. It's like, well, yeah, because it adds something to a different feel and kind of pushes them to a particular like kind of uniform level. But then it also like allows me to like break up what is intended and make it the way that I want to make it. So again, like, control chaos, like contrast in a box. It's like my box might be smaller, but I'm also going to have a crazy variety of things that are happening.
Yeah, and it's all very thought out and intentional, and it makes people pay attention. And I think there's interest there. It's when kind of goes back to the whole, when sometimes when you don't, when you haven't seen something before, when you haven't seen a mix of things that are normally together, then it feels new, and so it creates this interest. And I don't know, that's what I always love.
yeah I think like when it comes to gosh, I lost my thought. It was great and I lost it. we're talking about contrast and then creating interest with it. Say what you said again. I totally lost my train of thought.
Oh no, I was just saying how when there's a combination of things that aren't normally next to each other or seen together, or at least from like one person's perspective, then it can feel new. And when things feel new, they often there's interest and there's like more attention paid to them sometimes, I think.
And now I remembered what I was saying. So I think about within that, like, one of my old professors, he used to talk about like, if you plan everything out when it comes to a photo shoot, you don't leave any room for the spontaneity. He's like, if you know every shot that's going to be made in that, like, what fun is there in that? Like, that sounds boring. And so he's like, sometimes you just got to set up a time and just start shooting and just figure it out. And I'm definitely the type of person where like, I need to have a set of planned shots. Like, I need to have a shot list, because if I don't plan out like well enough, I feel like a shoot's just gonna suck. But then when I'm in a moment and stuff starts changing, then I can start adding elements, or if someone does something that I wasn't expecting, like, wait, stop. That's pretty dope. I even think back to the project, like this one, Still We Speak, which I've referenced a couple of times when people have been in this joint. But like, there was one time where I was shooting that I kind of wish I was staying a little bit more aware. So I was shooting one guy named Jared Seeley, shout out. And so the way I shot that project was, I had a snoot kind of like homemade snoot kind of set up to light just their face with a spotlight. And then I had a background light on a white background, so there was a stark contrast with what you were seeing and what you weren't, right? Mm-hmm. And then there was one time that the backlight, the background light didn't fire, and so then it was just this like snoot shot with this black face popping out of nowhere, and then this spotlight on his head that felt like, kind of Get Out vibe. And then, we're talking about like racial gerrymandering in North Carolina. And I find that shot so compelling. Like, and that was not what I planned to shoot. And I kind of wish I would have shot, alternate. Like that. Yeah, I wish I would have had more than just his like that. And it's, you could technically try to pull that off with just like turning the white background to black and doing some of the things, but it just doesn't feel the same. Like the organic nature of the other one just feels different. And so yeah, it's like giving yourself space to allow things to happen is just so important for me in all that. So
yeah, that's so incredible. I work a similar way, in where I always say, like, I need a plan, but the plan can change.
yeah.
And so there needs to be some structure, some bones to it, but then, like, I have to move freely within that. Otherwise it does not work. I work very intuitively also. And I always think of this, which I might misquote it, but it's a Simone Weil wrote about how attention is the most pure and rare form of generosity. And I'm sure I didn't quote that exactly right, but that's the gist of it. And I love that idea, because whether it's generosity, by paying attention to each other, we're giving each other that space, and just being generous with our time. But also, like, that can go back and we can give that to ourselves also. So even it came up for me when you were giving that example, because it's just like, when we do create the space to breathe and to problem solve if a light doesn't go off, but then not to go into panic mode and be like, oh no, a light didn't go off, but to just, like, to give ourselves, to be generous with ourselves and think, like, hey, what is really going on here? Do I like this? Does this make me feel something? And just to process. And so I think when we leave room for that, we would leave extra space, extra margin, or whatever, whether it's just, sometimes, this is kind of random, but, like, sometimes I love to arrive to places early, or just sit in my car for a little while. Or if I know it's going to take 10 minutes for me to walk from my car to a certain place, what happens if I leave 20 minutes to do that? Like, what will I notice on the way? And just being generous with my space and time for myself, but also for any interaction that may occur along the way. And anyway, that's that came up for me. And so, yeah, I heard you being really just generous with yourself, even, and noticing that, and giving yourself the time to, instead of reject that frame because it didn't turn out like you initially hoped, but could see the beauty and even in something much bigger and much more through that. I think it's great.
Yeah. I mean, which I'll kind of wrap it up with this. When we think about, again, tying that back into home, it's like, I create a space, and there are things that I particularly want to exist in that space, but then someone gives me a gift, and it's like, well, this doesn't necessarily fit my aesthetic, but then it goes back to, like, what you had said, this shouldn't work here, but it does, and I don't know why it does, but it does. And I just think sometimes it's just giving ourselves space to breathe, and allowing a process to happen, and just kind of have some beauty in the midst of it all. So yeah. All right. Well,
you're right.
Yeah. Well, thanks for taking the time to chill with me today, homegirl.
Yeah.
Plug your pluggables, as people say, so people can know where to follow you and keep up with your work or anything. So this time is yours. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Honestly, it's just been such an honor. It's always a joy. And yeah, I just appreciate you gifting me this space to hang out and talk about home and space and belonging. And those are some of my favorite topics. And I just have so enjoyed this morning. So my Instagram is Anna Hedges. It's probably the best place to find me around. But yeah, thanks, Trevor. I really appreciate it.
Cool. Appreciate you too, Anna. It's good to talk. Good to see your face, even if it's digital.
Likewise.
Yeah, it's been a hot minute. Everybody's stuck in home and not seeing everyone they're used to seeing, but
I know
it's good to connect.
For sure.
So yeah, appreciate y'all listening to this episode of Durag Thoughts. Stay tuned for Monday, when the next chapter of this story is going to drop, and then come back a week from today for the next episode of Durag Thoughts on Friday, where you can hear kind of conversations and topics surrounding the piece that's going to drop on Monday. I'll catch y'all on the flip. Be easy, be safe, peace.